Blog Talk Radio. Hello and welcome to Awakenings. Welcome everyone to Awakenings Radio. That was a bit of music, Elements of Grace by Diane Garris. I'm your host and, as I like to say, co-pilot, Michele Meiche. I want to welcome everyone that's coming in the chat and all those listening live via Cosmic Dimensions, and also those listening via iTunes and other podcast outlets. It's great to connect with all of you. And if you are new to Awakenings and you've just tuned into this radio program, let me tell you a little bit about Awakenings. We highlight interviews and dialogues with spiritual teachers, mystics, authors, metaphysicians, musicians, artists, spiritually minded people and progressive thinkers in their own field that are waking up, are awake and awakening more, and revealing and reflecting their awakening through their way of being in the world. We also at Awakenings Radio focus on conscious living for conscious lives. We're a bridging point between art, science, and spirituality. And Awakenings is also a timely relaying of essential information, insights, inspiration, and tools for transformation and spiritual unfoldment. And Awakenings is also part of the converging flow that we're all a part of and co-creating. If you are new to Awakenings and you're listening as a guest, welcome everyone. And if you would like to participate in the chat room and have more interaction, all you need to do is go to the bottom of the chat room box, and you can either sign in if you're already a member of Blog Talk Radio, and if you're listening as a guest and you want the interaction, all you need to do is register with your name and email address. And those that like to listen by phone, it's also the call-in number, and the phone number is 347-539-5122. That number again for listening is 347-539-5122. And if you would like to be heard, or you have a question or a comment, all you need to do is press 1 on the keypad, and that lets me know that you have a question or a comment, which we love. Those who have been listening for a while know we love interaction of all sorts in the sacred space of Empowerment Room, also known as the chat room. We love that interaction. And we're winding down. Friday is the last day of our, but we still want the letters coming in or the emails, but how and where you listen to Awakenings. And the email for that is awakenings@selfandlight.com, and that's, or Awakenings Radio. That's awakenings@selfandlight.com. And we have a little gift for everyone that, actually from Maui Shaman and myself, that everyone that contributed, letting us know. Now what does the God say? Friday is the last show. No, we're still, Awakenings is still going on, going strong. So the God in the chat room is saying. So Friday, it's not the last show. Friday is the last time, but you can still email me because I love the feedback. A lot of people have been sending in stories of how Awakenings has impacted them, or guests that they've listened to or actually done work with also. And then also how you listen to Awakenings. So where and how do you listen to Awakenings? Let's see, Ravel is asking, do I know about information? And I went to a school based on some works from Steiner. So yeah, definitely definitely great information, and on a whole way of living with the Rudolf Steiner focus, so you can get a lot of really good information. It's been a while since I've looked into that, but was a big proponent of the philosopher, and I guess you want to call it social thinker, and the spiritual movement of anthroposophy, which is about kind of transcendental, the idea of transcending, but also connecting in with science, spirituality, mysticism, theosophy. So I have a strong background, and also Waldorf schools and Summerhill, but also a lot of art, music, self-expression of all kinds connected with Rudolf Steiner. Very, actually went through a play that he had written years ago that was phenomenal. And big into connecting with the subtle energy. So why not? I think study a lot of different things. I'm very eclectic in my studies, from wisdom teachings, theosophy, psychology, transformational, healing work, trained with shamanism, and got initiated. Still working with a teacher to this day. So a lot of hypnotherapy, metaphysics, as a spiritualist, as a medium, so I think theology, studied theology as well, a lot of the Alice Bailey work. So I think you have to find your way, and some people are kind of weavers. Many people like to weave a bit of, in their path. And so I think you have to kind of, know that. I tend to weave a lot of different things. Studied with Baba Muktananda, Amaji, Gurmai, Hinduism, Buddhism, Kabbalah. I just studied Kabbalah for many years in the traditional teaching from lip to ear, where you meet with a teacher one-on-one. So I think in going on, I could go on and on. There's even more tone work, sound work. So I think that if you are drawn to something or a system of thought, beliefs, that's perhaps a nudging from the spirit that this is part of the soul expression. And on the farm, Ravel. Okay, you came across him because he has a whole agricultural side. I have friends that use his techniques on their farm. Yeah, I'd be interested to know more of that. I don't know much about this with the farm, but I do know for education. I taught school at one point and integrated some of the educational techniques and tools and beliefs. Also for art. I mean, Rudolf Steiner was very big on it's a whole lifestyle movement. So I think it's spirituality, or spiritual aspect is an aspect of that, but I believe so much of his work is really about livelihood, lifestyle, creative expression as well, artistic expression. So it's whole, but it's called biodynamic farming. Interesting. I don't know much about that, so if anybody knows that or feels like calling and sharing that would be great. And hello everyone in the chat that is getting in, and Vina. Hello, Vina. Yeah, he was very multidimensional, Rudolf Steiner. So those of you that are just now coming in the chat or listening by phone or listening later in the archives, we're talking about Rudolf Steiner. And I think, anything that's going to give you a good foundation, and then you decide what applies to you. And sometimes we outgrow things or we just go in a different direction. But however, I do feel when you feel really drawn to someone or some teaching or system of thought, that it is, definitely spirit-led and definitely suggesting that this is a piece, because we're really in so many ways what we're studying, we're filling in pieces. We're also remembering the reminders, remembering reminders, but it's also filling in pieces for us to have that foundation. And a lot of the soul work that's being done right now is really about that, allowing the blending that we are to be represented on a physical manifested level, which is what we're talking about, is really about coming from the soul. So that soul level is very individual, which is interesting. That's what makes, we're the individuated aspects of the all that is, or God, and the first individuation is from the soul, and the soul becomes to be an outpicturing of our personality. So our likes, our preferences, the individual way that we express the all that is and are the all that is, or an expression of the all that is. So yeah, definitely I agree. If you're feeling prompted in a certain direction, very often that's coming from the template of the soul, and it comes through the nudging of the pranic energy, of the life force energy of spirit, nudging you in that direction. And that's what allows us to have more creative expression, more individual expression. I like to call it full radiant expression. And in these times of reclaiming the shadow, reclaiming that which has been projected out or suppressed or repressed or hidden down, things like intuition, things like recognizing your divinity, things like sensing, feeling, telepathy, even things like the I can do it attitude, that I can imagine something and I can create it, instead of having to be funneled in the trough of mainstream consciousness only, or a template or a stamp that this is the path that you need to go, or this is the the successful path, or this is the way to success. So a lot of these kind of myths are being broken down, and lies, misinterpretations, however you want to put it. It doesn't really matter what you want to call it, but it's the idea perhaps of freeing up from that and reclaiming the truth of who you are, if you want to say who you all are. And it actually, it always dovetails this way. This is a perfect intro for our guest today, who started out on a path that was supposed to be, as we call worldly or mainstream, or success in the sense of race consciousness, a societal success, and began to deviate from that to hear a different tune or a different call. So we have with us today author, and I also would like to say spiritual teacher, Jeff Brown, whose book is called Soulshaping. If anybody wants to look on the site is soulshaping.com. And Jeff was born in Canada, and he actually studied law and medicine. He went to law school, and he apprenticed with a famous criminal lawyer, Eddie Greenspan. And it had actually been his lifelong dream to practice criminal law and search for the truth in the courtroom. But then, on the verge of opening his practice, he heard a voice, a small voice within, nudging him in a different direction. And the beauty is that he listened to that voice and moved in that direction to connect, what I would like to say, with his true path or soul path. Welcome to the program, Jeff.
Thanks, Michelle. I really enjoyed listening to the latter part of that intro. That was fantastic.
Thank
not
you.
The intro
yeah,
about, not the intro about me, but the subject matter before that.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting. It always dovetails to fit to what the guest is going to be sharing. You did it again. I love it.
It's interesting because so much of my struggle, not to interfere with any questions you may have, but it was trying to, I was like led in the direction of this idea of unity consciousness, and I would have these workshop experiences or kind of post-emotional release, these experiences of oneness, all oneness, and where I couldn't really make separations between things, and of course that didn't really answer my question, which was like, what was my particular soul scripture? What was my particular template of possibility or true path in the heart of it? So, and there was a lot of detachment literature out there, and there still is, which led me in the direction of this unity experience, but didn't really empower my particular unique journey in this lifetime. And So I think as my journey unfolded, I really found a way and continue to find a way to hold the unity and at the same time to understand that I have a particular place for my own journey in the heart of it, and to try to find that sacred balance between and amongst those two things. Yeah.
Well put. And I think that's in many ways, going to be the crux of this emergence, this emergence or evolution, is the particulate, as you're speaking of, that individuated part. How do I express that and experience that and revel in that and love that, and recognize that I'm still a part of the whole, that there is this unification, there is this oneness, but that there is this particulate or individuated aspect.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's such a new, many we've been doing it on the fringe, but imagine a mainstream consciousness that's doing this, a mainstream world, a world that is doing this. Wow.
Well, that's what's happening, and I think that there really was, and it still is, some value leading us in the direction of sort of detaching from our limited, linear, almost neurotic, localized idea of self, our misguided self-identifications, to give us, and this is what happened in my journey. I was stuck in that more linear place, and then I was led to workshop and do breathworks and stuff, and really I wanted to have a vaster consciousness experience, to see myself from up high, to see this from up high. But then it was like, okay, so then that's where society is now. We're just starting to step out and do like Eckhart's work and kind of come out and understand and see ourselves, detach from that, realize our identifications aren't all that we are, and then see a broader vista. But then, after a while, we're just going to float off to space. We then have to come back down into identification, but understand that it's a quest for an authentic identification, and that the grist for the soul mill for our cellular and unified expansion is in the heart of that localized experience. We just have to see it in the right way and work the material in the right way. And we weren't. We were
I
just
like how
spinning
you're putting
out.
that.
We were just spinning out into material.
Yes. And you're right. It is so much that, because it is about having this localized experience, but remembering, the ultimate truth. Like, there's nothing wrong with the localized experience.
No.
Individuated aspect of the I am. But for so long, there was so much material out there. And, of course, it was there wasn't a lot of material. There is on an esoteric level, but there wasn't a lot of material out there on the soul, which brings in the particulate, as you say, or the individuated aspect.
What James Hillman called the innate image. What's your particular sacred purpose, divine purpose, in this lifetime? And trying to find a way to hold that, so you hold the idea that you're part of this fantastic pie, and really to feel connected to your soul pod, which can be quite soothing and supported, and at the same time understand that you have a particular role to play. So, for example, I am Jeff Brown, and to say that I'm not Jeff Brown, or that God made a mistake or soul made a mistake by putting me in this form and that family in those circumstances is arrogant. Of course it was not a mistake, and no one has a right to say that it was, except me, and I'm not saying it. But so then it's like, okay, why that? So go to a vaster perspective and say, why did I choose that, or why was that chosen? And to see it as a growthful experience. That is, it's material, it's grist, it's sticky, it's formative. If I convert it, if I see it all the way through, I call it Sell Your Soul in the book, that the emotional body and the identifications are the karmic field where the soul's lessons are harvested. So if we go into that material in the right way with the right intention, see the learning all the way through, that's the place that we grow from. And we weren't doing that. I was just neurotic Jeff Brown, and that was the end of the story, and that really wasn't getting us anywhere, right?
Yeah. So I touched on it a little bit in the intro, but I'd love for you to share a bit of your path and that voice that you heard and how that came about, if you would, for our listeners.
In my adolescence, my childhood was really mostly just conflictual in this crazy family, but now and then I heard this, voice. There was like an inquiry going on internally, and a distinction that I made quite young between true path and false path. mean, I literally made this distinction. It was like this family was false path. Turns out that wasn't true at all. But I really had this idea that there was some other call living inside of me. And really, I think the first manifestation of it was this guy, Eddie Greenspan, who was a famous Canadian criminal lawyer. And I would see him on TV or in the news when I was an adolescent, and he felt really familiar to me. Like I knew him, like I understood his orientation as a defense lawyer, like he was my family, like my real family. And I used to say, I'm going to work with that guy one day. You know, and nobody listened because we were poor and nobody went to school. But I felt it, you know, and I doubted it too because we didn't come from a place that moved in those directions. But so that was the first sort of glimmer of knowing that there was this other path. And in my early 20s, I used to sit in undergrad, and I started just unconsciously, but of course consciously, writing in the side margins of my book, "You are not who you appear to be. You are not who you appear to be." Mm-hmm. So this voice of this distant flute of some other pathway of possibility was beginning to take up a little space inside of me. And then I had various glimmers of other pathways as a psychotherapist, as an author, different things. And eventually, after you have to apprentice in Canada, I articled with Eddie and did a primary murder trial here with him and had a profound, unusual articling experience. And afterwards was doing the bar admission course, and I had to make this decision. Am I going to practice law or am I not? And then this distant flute, really took on a more solidified form. And I had started to call this voice inside of me Little Missy. The warrior who I identified myself as named her Little Missy. It was in an insulting, disparaging way, actually. Like she was weak and demure and unable to open doors for herself. But she got really noisy, this Little Missy, and I had a spiritual emergency. I just had one habitual way of being that my soul knew best as warrior archetype, pushing up against me, digging in its heels, and I had this esoteric voice of Little Missy pulling me in some other direction, not telling me who I was, but telling me law was who I wasn't. And really then I embarked on a 15-year-long journey to figure out what path I was here to walk. But it really started with that hazy, agitating, esoteric voice that was her.
Mm. Yeah. And I've started reading a bit of your book, and you talk about this lost period, which I think so many people, embarking on a more conscious path. Miss Katiana in the chat. Jeff, you can hear me. Jeff is a tad quieter. Great. If you can, Jeff, when you speak, I guess speak. Yeah. Or turn the phone up or speak. Yep. Okay, great. But you talk about this. Sometimes we live lost, and you say knowingly surrendering our attachment to who we think we are, voluntarily stumbling around in the dark with little to guide us. Yeah. That, I think, deters people so much from the path because they start getting their true path. They get, you get in that little lost mode. And you go, oh, never mind, let me go back. Yeah. How did you experience that? And did you ever have a feeling or thought that maybe not to listen to the voice? Or it's going to cause too much trouble to go in this new direction because you would this was like a lifelong dream of yours, this criminal law, being in court.
This was a miserable birthing process, and I felt pulled back to law and ultimately went back to law after stepping away from it. I felt pulled back internally to law about 2 million times, and it was a very, very tumultuous process. I was a warrior being. I was tangible and focused, and that's what I knew. That's what I knew historically on a cellular level. That's what I knew as a conditioned male. That's what I knew because it was how I survived and pulled myself out of poverty and overcame the odds. And so to then go into a place of not knowing who I was, laying on a couch, trying to invite voices up into the surface of my awareness, befriending confusion, these were foreign concepts. And of course, Western culture doesn't encourage us to move in these directions. There's no value placed on the not knowing. But of course, it's like the image of the monkey who lets go of the one vine, and as it's reaching for the next vine, there's this moment, this faith moment, a moment which may last years. That's just the nature of the path. When you're reaching for the next vine and you're not quite holding on to it. And for whatever reason, I got it, or little Missy coached me in the direction of getting it. She was the best life coach possible. that really I had to learn to sit in that place in between for as long as necessary until I had something else tangible to hold on to. And I think if you can't do that on this journey, you're just going to keep going back to your habitual range of emotion and the patterns that have worked and kept you alive. And, it'll feel good because you won't be in that confusion, but ultimately will lead to all kinds of symptoms of, false path and truth aches and sacred grumbles, all the things that happen when we don't listen to the voice. But I would say I sat in the not knowing somewhere between 5 and 8 years and explored, and eventually it became adventurous. It was like, okay, I get this. This is kind of cool. I don't know who I am, and I explore something, and then I feel a little closer to who I am. And, you have to start to develop some curiosity or a sense of wonder about it. But at the beginning, I always tell people, get ready for perhaps a very long period of time, depending on your soul scriptures, what you're shedding and what you're moving towards, when you're not going to know who the hell you are, and you just, I say flake it till you make it in the book, and that's really really what it is.
Which I love that. It's so, and I'm when I read that, I thought, oh, thank God somebody's speaking of this, because a lot of other, authors or people that go, they kind of skim over that part.
Yeah, you can't.
Everyone talks about
the journey.
Right?
It's the journey.
It's the journey.
How do you skim
but
over
everyone
it?
likes, right. But everybody likes to talk about the beginning and then where they got.
Yeah.
But the lost period of questioning, or what am I doing? Because that whole reorientation of energy that has to happen. One of my teachers used to say that chaos before new order, that confusion before new creativity comes through. Yeah. And I agree with you. If people don't go through that, and you may go back and forth, bounce at it, but I love what you said about what you say, let yourself get curious. That you got interested in it.
But that takes time. You need a little evidence that it's a beneficial process. And you may not have that evidence for a long time. And, for me to let go of that, I wasn't someone who walked into law and had walked into the wrong path. I needed to do law. That's why I knew Eddie was part of and I ended up working with Eddie. Mm-hmm. It was all part of my template. It was necessary for me on the Trailways of Transformation to walk into that office and hang out with Eddie Greenspan for a year. And so for me, it was very complicated because I was going to let go of a warrior way that was so familiar. The courtroom was like a joke to me. It was so natural and so easy. Mm-hmm. To then become this soul shaper dude was a long, long, arduous process, and not necessarily for everybody soul scriptures quite that conflictual. There was conflict at the heart of mine, and maybe for others the transition can be a little smoother, but I've never met, I don't think, more than a handful of people who got to a place of really knowing why they're here and waking up every morning doing it without having to go through at least a number of years of this kind of a process. Just the emotional component alone takes years,
Yeah. I think even if you do, because I had a strong sense of, as a child, what I was here to do, but you still go through those lost periods because the how to do what you do changes. Even like you say with Eddie Greenspan, you ended up working with him. So we never know, why does somebody fit in or a certain situation fit in. And, of course, our local mind tries to figure out and say, well, it must be this and that, and then it's totally something different. And you are kind of blindsided where you go, wow, I thought it was going to be this, but now it's something else, So I think that you're sharing with people to give them a heads up and saying, no, you are this is part of the path. It doesn't mean you're off path because you feel lost or uncertain as to the manifestation of the path.
It's
a part of the path.
Absolutely. It's intrinsic to this journey for almost every single one of us. I don't know how you can do the soul-shaping journey without it.
Yeah. Now, we have a couple questions about the explain the flake it.
Yeah.
I heard it.
Yeah, no.
So,
absolutely.
Explain how to do that.
Well, I'm not talking, it's kind of kitschy, right? I'm not talking about, we've all encountered and perhaps been unconscious flakes. That is, that we're not really trying anything in a real way. We're just like detaching from everything. We're not really, I say depth charges in the book, and the idea is that you do things to excavate pathways of possibility. You try things on for size. You have an idea that you want to be a writer. You really sit down in a really solid way and you try that, and you authenticate whether that's really intrinsically part of your path or whether it was like off path, it was like misinformation. And that's really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about flake it till you make it, that you really consciously jump into what you're calling the lostness, what I would call the not knowing, and explore pathways of possibility for who you are, and be okay with that, as opposed to simply staying conveniently confused, self-distracting tendencies, claiming to be exploring, but actually just doing kind of the West Coast ungrounded spirituality trip and not really trying this life thing on for size. And so flake it till you make it, but in a really solid and focused way.
And part of what I'm hearing you say is giving oneself permission to have this nebulous time, to go through this time where there might be one part of the mind saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with this? Or what's direction? What are you going to do? Is that what you're saying? That there may this time where you may not know. Maybe you're studying a lot or feeling things out or trying things on, but that you have to give yourself that time.
Absolutely, yes. You have to grant yourself, and that time. It's like, maybe your particular soul scriptures are to stay on the edge of clarity for 45 years. And if that feels really true, I think it's all about soul tracking. It's about getting to know your inner world so well and trusting it intuitively so well that you know where you have to go, no matter what anybody else tells you, because nobody else knows except you. And to do enough work so that, you can really embody all of these possibilities, regardless of how ridiculous they may look from the outside. Through a survivalist lens, all of this stuff we're exploring is ridiculous because it doesn't always lead to food on the table, shelter, a good, strong RSP, savings for when you turn 65, all the rest of it. But when you see sort of, wholeness as the only retirement worth striving for, really you start to see things through a very different lens. And then you start to get really comfortable, like not knowing. Like right now I'm in a kind of a not knowing place. I sold the house, I'm moving to the country, Soulshaping has taken over my reality, but yet I have economic needs. I feel this confusion. Now, this isn't the first time I've been in this place, this shedding, this moving into the next form place. I'm now familiar with it. And I know, even though it gets a little scary sometimes, that it's beautiful,
Yeah.
But you have to have that experience sometimes, a lot of times, especially if you grew up in a survivalist landscape with poverty consciousness. Everything's about the bottom line. Your parent, most grandparents didn't say do what you love. They said, they gave you practical advice to get a job that was most likely to sustain a reliable income. You got to work against that, and this is the place we're at in the culture where we're somewhere between survivalist frameworks of perception and this new burgeoning cellular consciousness. And and I call it ascending with both feet on the ground. We have to hold it all together, and it isn't easy. It isn't easy at all.
No.
But, yeah.
I love it. Now, we've got a couple of questions. I'm getting the questions in the chat, and I'm also getting caller 917-733. You're on Awakenings. Did you have a question or a comment?
I have a comment. Good afternoon, beautiful ones.
Good afternoon.
Hello, and to whom are we speaking with?
You're speaking with Radia in New York City.
Hello, Radia.
Hi, Michelle. I just have to say, Jeff Brown, you are right on time, my friend. When I say this show is synchronistic in my life, I have like chills on the back of my, on the back of my head, and I feel like weeping because last night I was going through it, and I'm in the place that you're referring to, and I've been in this place for 3 years. Not knowing, going through the rigmarole, and what you just stated is so significant about how your parents, your family, they give you practical advice and things of this nature, and me going against the grain with that and just going with the flow. And something very amazing happened to me last night as I was going through this really rough time. I ended up giving a gift to someone that I do for myself on an everyday basis. I sort of take it for granted. And I had a light bulb moment. It was so profound. And I thought to myself, well, wow, maybe this is an aspect of my life that is going to be, the gift and my sole purpose. I do readings. I read for myself, but someone called me in an emergency, and this magic happened, and this is the second time this has happened, but this is the first time that I actually realized, my God, where did that come from? Maybe I have a gift and I'm not giving it the recognition that I should be giving.
Right on.
And I pondered it, and this afternoon I turn on Awakenings Radio, and here you are talking about this journey and what I'm going through. And I thought I was going to jump off my balcony, because I'm like, I cannot believe the universe is, you know, aligning up with me and giving me, like, reassurance, you know, and that I'm not alone, and that I'm on the right path. I just want to say I am so grateful. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Fantastic. Don't jump off the balcony without a parachute.
No, I mean that in a good way, but but you guys understand what I'm saying? Like, you get excited when you're like going through it and you feel alone, and you're like posing these questions to the universe, and the universe, you know, I feel that the Creator laughs at you know, the children of the world, because we like go through it and our mind is like this terrorist on us when we're on the right path, and pain does not necessarily mean that it's a bad path. So when you get an answer, it just, you know, it blows my mind. I just want to scream at the top of the mountain, like, thank you. I know that sounds really dramatic, but I get excited because I feel like I'm being listened to. I'm not ignored, but I can go on forever. I'm going to get off the line. I send you love.
Well, obviously you put the call out, you know, and you don't have to do it alone. There used to be a myth that you had to do it alone, and you can have support, especially in these days and times. You can call it in, and that's what you did. You called it in, and that's why you're on the air, you're listening. That's, you know, you connected with Jeff Brown and what he has to say through Soulshaping. You did that. You called it in.
And in terms of drama, just to say, it is dramatic. It is something worth screaming and shouting about, because there is nothing more important than finding your divine purpose in this lifetime. It changes everything in your life when you're living from purpose. And, you know, tangible, clarified soul scriptures that are being actualized, it is so worth screaming and shouting about from the top of the mountain. Absolutely.
It is, and when you say drama, it was drama, because last week I'm crying and I'm talking to God. I'm like, is anybody up there listening to me? What's going on? Get on your business. You know, we all go through it. You guys, you're laughing because you know exactly what I'm talking about. I've been there. Oh, yeah. Oh, sweetie, hello. Let's not go there. But when you say drama, I can laugh at that, too. And this is just the best gift. Because this enlightens my heart. I love Awakenings Radio. Thank you so much, girlfriend, and thank you, Jeff Brown. Thank you so much. So grateful. Love you guys. Bye-bye.
Lots of love to you.
Lots of love to you, sweetie.
And that's the nature of the soul pod. You know, there's a soul pod now. You know, we're not.
Absolutely.
You know, people are all doing this. You know, we call to each other. I summon you. You summon me. Our angels broker the deal. And, you know, when I did this 20 years ago, particularly in the law environment and criminal law, I mean, I knew I felt like a freak. I didn't really care that much most of the time, but for a lot of people who are really super isolated and don't have a warrior structure, it can be so isolating that they fall back into familiar patterns. So it's important to reach out. But that's
why the support.
Yep.
The books, the CDs. I know. I also 20 plus years ago with the soul or soul alignment, and I was in a field where people would say, well, don't say what you are really into or what you believe. And I'm like, why not? And what I found is most people had a sense of this, but it was closeted. They were afraid to admit these leanings, you know, or I think so much now with the information right now that's coming out, Jeff. In a way, it's permission and confirmation, and perhaps, especially reading through your book, a bit of guidance, but I almost feel like steps to the bridge, like, hey, I went through this too, or try this, or go this way, right?
Yeah.
To help those now that are, and again, that are awakening to this state of truth of who they really are, but also to infuse it right into our systems, into our culture, so that this isn't something that's so fringe.
No, not fringe at all. And, you know, I was very careful when I was writing. You know, sometimes I felt the temptation to try to write the book like as a 15 steps book. And I really try not to do that, just to tell my story, because I know, I'm certain that, I mean, if you get into it and you make this a steps process or something, you're not going to probably find your way to your soul shape in this lifetime, because it's so bloody unique, you know? I mean, I had to start with the psychological, work my way towards the spiritual, because my emotional debris was so pressing, and I had to clear space inside by clearing emotional debris to even begin to hear from my solar self. Some other people hear the call on a spiritual level far in the beginning, work in that way, pull out of the psychological body or the notion of self or egoic self, and then work their way back into the body. And so if anything, soul shaping is just a reminder to people that in fact it's available, the sacred purpose lives inside of them, give them some possible templates, some possible directions they can go. But, you know, I mean, meditation wasn't my path. Other people are able to come to this clarity sitting on the cushion, and that's, you know, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, we're different. But I agree, though, but the thing is, if it's really connecting on a soul level, and you're calling it soul shaping, it is going to have those different components. For some, a physical, mental, right, emotional, spirit. And it is so individual that, I mean, you can suggest things, but really that person has to awaken to that process that's emerging through them. And for some, you're right, it may be more mental in the beginning, more emotional. We have some further questions, Jeff. You spoke of grounded spirituality. Could you touch on that, please?
Yes. Really, at the heart of soul shaping, really, as I was working with soul shaping and writing the book, and now I began to make a film towards the end of it called Carmageddon about Bhagavan Das, I was really struggling with this question. I didn't want a detached model. I had spent a little bit of time around what I call spiritual bypassers in the book, and I myself was one. Somebody who was going to spirit, like going on a bliss trip, trying to pull up and away from my body, up and away from my identifications, up and away from this very difficult mundane reality, to find some kind of blissful, like almost like being on a pogo stick to the stars with no rootedness. Ultimately, what would happen is I would then get into a relationship, be completely fucked up, and I would fall back down to earth, right? So as my journey unfolded, I really was trying to weave together this concept that I call ascending with both feet on the ground. I'm actually going to read that, if that's okay.
Oh, I'd love to,
Yeah, soul shaping is a philosophy of grounded spirituality. We grow by coming down into our body and our personhood and learning the lessons necessary for our expansion. You have to grow down to grow up. Ascending with both feet on the ground is the idea that our ascension to a more heightened consciousness can only be sustained if it's an embodied unfolding from the ground up, that is, from soul, S-O-L-E, to soul. We begin with the root chakra. The quest for Om begins at home, and we work our way up from there. It's not enough for our feet to merely skim the ground. The mythic life begins with our feet planted on Mother Earth. With our souls firmly planted, our soul has a leg to stand on in its efforts to go higher. Once the root chakra is satisfied, we proceed to the next chakras. As we heal, there emerges a natural and sustainable movement upward toward God. This philosophy bridges the Eastern quest for the eternal with the Western quest for emotional health. Soul meets soul on sacred footpaths. I call that Western consciousness now, the blend of the quest for unity consciousness and the wise quest for a healthy self-concept and strong ego in the West, and that's ascending with both feet on the ground.
Yeah. I like that, because there was, and of course, anything that is non-inclusive is really coming from the constructed ego. And you're right. So for so long there was this idea of, out of the body, or the body's bad, or blissing out, or like it was like escaping anywhere but here.
Yeah, and they call that enlightenment.
But yet we're here.
But then that gets reframed as enlightenment by spiritual bypassers who don't want to deal with their pain bodies because they don't feel they have the tools to do that. And that never seemed to me to be really anything like enlightenment. I use the term enrealment, which to me makes more sense, which is the quest for an experience of spirituality that involves being connected to every realm at one time, true inclusivity, so that we're here for everything, not just for the things that feel the most comfortable.
Now, I want to ask you, you bring up a good point. I want to get your thoughts, your take on this. Do you think and feel at some point that will be out of the system? Because we have so many belief systems and systems of thought, philosophical systems, religious systems, that there is that spiritual bypass, or you're here because you did something wrong, or you're going to learn it next time, or this, and this, jumping out of the body to get anywhere, to be anywhere but here. Do you feel that that's part of the track, is to move away from that or evolve away from that?
Away from the bypass model?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's happening. I think that it's become confusing because many of the misinterpretations, for example, of law of attraction have a bypass quality to them.
Yeah.
You just ask what you want and you get it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And, some of Eckhart's stuff can be construed and taken in a way that's bypass-oriented, and that's the danger. You end up being this disembodied automaton thinking you're having a spiritual experience, and in fact, there's no heat or energy coming off of the body. My enlightened vision of enlightenment, if there is one, is somebody who's strongly rooted in their body, energy coming through their body, heart is open, eyes are bright, all of it coming from this sacred temple that is the body. And, I think we're moving away from it. I mean, Soulshaping is moving into the mainstream because of this. Robert Augustus Masters has a book coming out soon through North Atlantic called Spiritual Bypassing. Fantastic book where he goes to the next level, far beyond what I did in Soulshaping, and starts to call people and teachers on this bypass stuff. Because the bypass is dangerous. And I talk about it, and I'm told, and here's another example of the bypass, that as a spiritual writer or / teacher, whatever it is, I'm not supposed to disparage or discredit anybody else's model, which is just really basic nonsense, because these models need to be discussed and brought out in the open, including mine.
Yes.
Because that's because if they are taken as truth, for example, if you take a bypass model as truth, you're going to have millions of people wandering through the world as automatons, missing out on their life experience. It's important to talk about these things. It's important to debate them the way that we debate anything in the political forum, for example. Because
I love it. I love the heretical. Especially with the secret. There's certain things, and I will put my 2 cents in. I'll just say, listen, and I go back to common sense.
I'll put $1 in.
You'll put $1 worth.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
But I like what you're saying with this, because I think people. Years ago, someone told me, don't just tell me what do you think or what do you feel. If I already know what's in my head, I'm coming to you to ask your thought or your opinion. And I agree. I think for so long, people were kind of, censoring or muting themselves, saying, even knowing that something in their world or their realm, that this is not viable or could be dangerous or is leading someone perhaps astray. So I applaud you for speaking up.
That's the cult trip. We see what happens in cults. It's no different. It's like mainstreaming the no gossip cult mentality, right? Absolutely.
Yes. Oh,
I welcome anybody who disagrees with anything that I say in that book or on these radio shows to tell me what they disagree with. I got a lot to learn too. And I invite everybody to take on all of these models, because these models are going to decide our planet. These models as to what spirituality is, how do we live in our bodies, how do we relate to divine purpose, do we even believe in divine purpose, do we believe our existence is arbitrary versus do we believe our existence is very pointed and directed and meaningful? These are the most profound questions we'll ever ask on this planet, and we need to get them right out in the open, and I may do a Soulshaping radio show starting in the fall, because I want to start talking about these things, and if it's controversial, who cares? Who cares?
Yeah.
If it helps a few more people, who cares if they try to take me down?
Well, the thing is, common sense. You can't say that we have purpose or meaning or being here, and then at the same time you did something wrong, that's why you're here, or it was a mistake. Okay, it's like, or there are no mistakes, but somehow me being here was a mistake,
Well, exactly. It's all very confused. People were confused. It's like they're on the yoga mat. Are they there to get into their emotional body or to get out of their body? They're like questing for unity consciousness, and then all of a sudden this healthy self-concept thing we've been working towards in the West, getting out of shame, believing empowered, feeling like we're magnificent and meaningful and have real purpose on this earth, suddenly seems ridiculous and egoic. We call that egoic, right? We don't distinguish healthy ego from false ego. So people are wandering around not sure inside their own bones whether they should feel good about themselves or whether feeling good about themselves is ridiculous and that in fact they're nothing. It's pretty confusing.
You have to have an ego I always say, okay, if you don't have the personality or the ego, the true ego, then who's sitting in the chair and who's interfacing? Who's the
And who's
physicality,
doing your soul's bidding for you? Who's getting to work, making your soul's dreams come true, actualizing your soul shape in this lifetime? Ram Dass said it well. He said, you have to become something before you become nothing. And, and I would go farther and say you have to become something so that when you strive to become nothing, there's somebody to come home to. You have to have somebody to come home to, or all you're really doing is floating off into space, and that is not a human experience.
And that's what we're here to do, is have that experience. Jeff, did you ever have any thought in your travels and research how this happened, how the disconnect started happening, and the misinformation, and for instance, even the spiritual bypassing? Do you have any thought on that?
No, I just think there's so much pain on the planet, Like, I'm being very assertive about this right now, but I also at the same time have a lot of compassion for it, and I know it in myself. I only can talk about it so strongly because I know this in myself.
So you feel like it was a way to deal with pain, so let's leave certain things out or parts out?
Absolutely.
Do you think it was like a coping? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a coping strategy, that gets reframed as an enlightenment model, because if the teachers of this coping strategy can convince you it's enlightenment, then they don't have to look at their own shadow.
Wow. Jeff, that's powerful. Wow.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's effective.
I got goosebumps.
It's trippy, and it's real tricky.
Yeah.
And it's very subtle, and you have to know your intentionality so well to know when you're coming at this idea of spirituality from the right place or from an avoidant place, what I call self or soul-destructive behavior in the book.
Yeah. Have those checks and balances, which I love. And also, I feel good, great, honest people in your life also that can call you on stuff. If you have if you have too many yes people and they're fanning the peacock feathers at you.
Right.
Shadows up, right?
Absolutely, but the challenge is now we're told that that's judgmental. This is another misconception of the New Age movement.
Yeah.
That a good critical capacity for discernment is misinterpreted and called judgment, so that nobody wants to tell you what they see who knows you, or to even inquire into it because they don't want to be non-compassionate and judgmental. That's also ungrounded spirituality. There is a place for discernment, and there is a place for healthy judgment that's of a constructive nature, and I think we have to realize that.
Well, I see a new book, Grounded Spirituality, coming in for you.
Right on.
Really, I do. Now, we have a couple more questions. I'll ask questions in the chat. And also, those that are listening by phone, the number's 347-539-5122. And if you have a question, just press 1 on the keypad, and that'll alert me that you have a question. You touched on this just briefly, but we have a question about, you said something about depth charge. Could Jeff expound on depth charge? What is depth charge?
I'll give you a quick definition from the Soulshaping Dictionary at the back of the book. In the context of psychological issues, depth charges are actions taken with the intention of triggering unacknowledged issues and repressed emotions into awareness. In the context of spiritual path, depth charges are intentional efforts to ignite our inner knowing and excavate our soul scriptures from below the surface of our daily lives. So, for example, psychologically, I had a social avoidance pattern at some point in time. So a depth
now, would this be like emotional charge, the depth charge, similar?
Yeah. This is in a psycho-emotional category, just to categorize for the moment. So I would deliberately walk myself into socially uncomfortable situations in order to bring my material to the surface so I could work with it. That's an example. Rather than avoiding those situations, I would go into that discomfort, shake it all up, shake the stuff up and bring it to the surface so I could work with it. In terms of the spiritual, what I call the spiritual category, or in terms of my cellular path, after doing more psychological work and moving in the direction of then asking what my callings were, I might, for example, go to a writing workshop, because there I wanted to see if, in fact, the path to be a writer lives strongly inside of me. Might be uncomfortable, might be triggering. That's something I would do. Or I'd go to a holotropic breath work with Stan Groff for 4 days and really breathe into all the stuff I'm holding in my body. A true depth charge, just like dropping a torpedo into your being and seeing what the heck comes up to the surface.
So you're doing it in a conscious, empowered way.
Absolutely.
Is what I'm hearing.
It's like conscious mischief in a way, in order to get information as to who you are. Because if you stay in your habitual range of emotion, if you stay in the way of beings that you're used to, that are comfortable for you, you're unlikely to find the new information that you need to move forward.
I love this, Jeff, because you're really taking that emotional charge or that triggering, but doing it in an empowered way.
Yes.
And then people then it's at such, what I hear you also saying, I see this wonderful landscape of a wonderful intimacy that people can have with themselves.
Yes, that's right.
Right, to know where they're at or what they really need to do. What's my next piece, right? It's coming from you because of this charge. Wow, that's
instead of projecting this fascination outward all the time, to realize that you are your greatest cornucopia of delight. And to do enough work inside, and at first maybe uncomfortable because you're not familiar with it, maybe uncomfortable because you have emotional material coming up, but once you start to work some stuff through, it's absolutely fascinating. The inner travelogue is so much more engaging than anything that you'll do on the outside.
Absolutely.
That's the trip.
It is the trip. Oh, I love it. Tatiana in the chat, I love gray. It's the new black and white. I agree, yes. I agree. Right. And also, we have a listener that is asking if the book is also auditory book.
No, but I'm going to talk to the publisher about that soon. I think that's the next step.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And another question, if you could go soul tracking. What is soul tracking?
Yeah, it's just, doing enough work so that you're really going for this initially subtle connection to kind of the voice or the tenor of your soul scriptures that live inside of you, and doing so much work with depth charging and with emotional release and with breath work and whatever calls you, spending time in nature, that you begin to get more acquainted with what I call the little voice that knows, that lives inside of you. And so that eventually what you're doing is you're tracking where you are at in your soul-shaping journey. You understand this life in those terms, and you get a real measured and clear and clarified sense as to when you're off path or when you're on path, whether you're moving on the appropriate and additive ways of transformation, or whether you're just walking in the wrong direction. And that happens through tracking your soul, to finding it, to sensing your essential self, to getting to know its textures and contours so well that all you're really doing most of the time is tracking where you are at on your journey.
Tracking the journey, I like that. And it really brings it back to the person taking some, and Tammy put in the chat, it sounds like accountability, and I would agree. It sounds like there's some accountability. Jeff, Debbie is asking in the chat, is it also is it listening to your intuition? Is it similar to listening to your intuition?
Yeah, I think this body has thousands of years of knowing, and it carries forward, it really does. And I think our intuition is very closely linked to our truth. For me, I say truth is the gateway to the moment, And when we're in our truth, when we're honoring our intuitive self, for the most part, we're moving in the right direction. And yeah, those hints and whispers that were pulling me away from trial law after I had articled with Eddie, really that was just my intuitive hit, that there was somewhere else that I had to walk. Yeah, honor the intuition. Make sure it's grounded. Make sure you know yourself well enough to distinguish false intuition, say, from intuition that's connected, tethered to your authentic self. But yeah, absolutely honor the intuition.
Now, you bring up a good point here, because I've seen this quite a bit. With the false intuition, any thoughts on I was going to say filtering, but also maybe illumination process so that people are less likely to follow the false intuition?
Well, just keep making
that's a pitfall.
Mistakes. Just keep making mistakes. We're still at that stage. The ladder to heaven is made of broken rungs. We're still at that stage in human development, and we have to celebrate our mistakes. As long as we're willing to learn from them, and that's where we'll learn the difference. We'll see where we walk. When we walk in the right direction, we know we listen to our authentic intuition, and when we keep banging up against walls, we know that it's something else that's prodding or pulling us, and not some intuition that's connected to our soul scriptures. The idea of soul scriptures is the idea that we have particular callings, lessons, and key relationship experiences that are almost pre-encoded inside of us. And that if we find those, we excavate those, and we honor the lessons, that's how we grow our soul one step closer on its movement towards wholeness. So if we're moving closer, it's like someone said to me the other day, how do you feel about being 47? And I said, I feel fantastic because I know I'm on my path, If I felt like I was on a false path, I'd be real miserable about it, And I think that's just really what it is, You start seeing your life in terms of this journey, and that really you came in with an encoded, it's almost like there's a library inside of you.
Yeah.
You learn to pull down the book of you, and it's dusty and it's hard to find sometimes, but you keep doing it until you get this really embedded in you that there's this path of value inside of you, and then your intuition gets so strongly linked to it, and you make fewer mistakes as you go.
Yeah. And then it's seamless, really, so much.
Mostly, but not all. But
mostly,
no guarantee of seamlessness, right?
Yeah. Well, mostly, yeah. It gets more seamless.
It gets more seamless. It sure does. Absolutely.
And you talk about this I love the way that you talk about this, whether we consciously know it or not, that we're subscribers to this universal broadcasting system. And I love the way that you put that. If you could touch on that what is this broadcasting system? We've heard of this, that we're broadcasting all the time. And is there a way for people to connect in with that?
Yeah, it's like this was my challenge to some of the misinterpretations of law of attraction. I don't think in the proper way of interpreting it's like this, but it's just this idea that you kind of ask for what you want and you get it. And my experience was that the universe sent me what I needed to grow forward no matter what I asked for, And that the more authentic my request was, the more it was clarified in terms of what I actually needed to move forward, the more likely it was to come my way. So the UBS I define quickly as the dynamic and benevolent network of relatedness that brings lessons and messengers onto our path in an effort to grow our soul to the next level of consciousness. Serendipity central. The universe presents us with endless opportunities to synchronize our path with our truth. And I just found that more and more all the time, that at first I felt quite isolated, but as I did more work and nudged my way into truth more as a way of being, this universe seemed to kick into gear, and certainly now it is, and support my every move in a more seamless way than it had initially, and remind me that, in fact, I'm not alone. At first it's hard to see that, but once you do more and more work to honor your path, the universe notices that and then supports it in a more obvious way without having to do horribly upsetting things to try to wake you up.
Well, I think with the misinterpretation you touched on with the law of magnetic attraction, as it's actually called, is that the soul is not taken into account. It's what the constructed ego would like, and it's drawing in or trying to co-create or create from that level. But something may or may not be in the soul template. It may or may not be in that.
Right.
In the however the blueprint. So I love what you're saying about that, feeling it out or going within whatever that form is for an individual, and the nudging to see where are you actually being guided or drawn, because that's going to reflect what the actual encoding is.
That's exactly it. And it's going to be hazy because we're still living in a fundamentally unconscious world, overstimulated, disconnected, survivalistic, tangible, material, egoic, false ego notions of success. So, at this stage of consciousness, it's work to bring that voice into awareness, to resuscitate it and to give breath to it. And we have to be prepared for that. That which is truest very often at this stage of human development is going to be quietest. So we have to learn to listen to what's quietest to find our way.
And what a few ways that have worked for you in clearing, I think you even talk about clearing the debris, I believe, in your book. Do you have any suggestions on that for our listeners?
Well, I did therapy for years, and eventually, and talk therapy was perfect. It was all I was ready to do for a long time. It was safest and effective, and eventually I moved in the direction of more body-centered work, like bioenergetics with Al Lowen and some core energetics workshop work. And, I felt that was important. I needed to really move the emotional material out of my body, I wrote on the wall of my apartment when I was younger in my 20s, excessive analysis perpetuates emotional paralysis, and that was true for me. I was a head tripper. I still am a bit of a head tripper and can easily forget my emotional body. And the thing that helped me most was doing retreats or workshops where I could do intensive breath works or intensive emotional release work. And so I encourage people to look into bioenergetics, core energetics, make sure it's a real grounded core energetics practitioner.
And breath work is amazing, too. Yeah.
And holotropic Stangroff's work
holotropic,
is absolute genius. That dude is a grounded spiritual genius, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I loved him. He was credible. I spoke to him.
He walked the talk. Yeah.
He absolutely, and he does. And I think his work will echo for all eternity. I really do. He really gets it. And if you can find a way to do some holotropic breath works with good trained practitioners, and I think you have to be careful, that can bring all kinds of emotional material up that needs to be moved out that you're never going to get to if you do shallower therapeutic work.
Yeah, I got trained in that a while back. I used to do quite a bit groups of that, and one thing that I do like is that the sitters are not interpreting, and I think that's so important.
So, did you say the
as a material? The sitters are not interpreting.
Oh. Right.
When you're doing the holotropic breath work. And I said, I think that's so important that, the material's allowed to come up in the way that it does. And
Yeah. I mean, he was a scientist. He loved the stories of what happened for people without judging them. It was really quite fantastic. Everything was fine. And the story, you sit around with a group of people after they've done a 3-hour holotropic, remarkable. I mean, you even just sit in the room watching people tantrum and freaking out and doing and primaling and floating away on magic carpets and whatever the heck's going on and moving rage and grief. And it is an unbelievable experience. And, when you've had that experience, it's very difficult to take people's adaptations and disguises very seriously after that, because you see what's really going on inside. Yeah, and it's quite different.
Again, that intimacy, and I love his spiritual emergency, spiritual emergence book as well. Yeah, it's great. What and talk a little bit, because the succession of awakenings or the wave that is taking place collectively. How do you see the individual awakening that's taking place as well as the collective?
Well, I think they're the same. And I don't see this as being this. I think it's been hyped up a lot. I don't see what's happening now as some remarkable transition or trend. I think there's been some building blocks, some foundational work done on a basic needs level around the world, so that many of us can begin to entertain these questions more readily. I think also the recession, the fact that we responded differently to this recession. So many people in prior recessions went back to meat and potatoes, and so many of us now are looking to these deeper questions, suggest that something has shifted in our collective consciousness, that we're entertaining more meaningful questions as a way of being, even in the heart of difficult economic circumstances. But at the same time, I also believe on a planetary level that we have hundreds of years to go. Just dealing with foundational issues, rule of law in many cultures is completely rabid and really not even happening in the way that it needs to. And we have a long way to go. This is a beautiful opening, but I think it's one of hundreds of different openings and movements upward to come in human evolution. Yeah.
So an opening. That's an
opening.
I like that. So it's an opening.
Yeah, and we're reaching out. Our hands are coming through the opening, and finally, for once, we're feeling other hands and pulling each other back and forth and connecting to one another. And I think that's really huge. But, it's only the beginning. I think the stuff Gene Houston wrote about, and possibly human, we have such unlimited, extraordinary potential to be just magnificent beings, and we're just inching our way into it. And that's why I think, while on the one hand we have to really work towards it and make it matter, at the same time I don't think we can be so bloody hard on ourselves when we find our way, we fall off of the trailways of transformation now and then and fall back to old patterns. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back is still progress. And so I think we can't be too hard on ourselves. Growers are inchworms, but at the same time, keep prompting each other to move a little forward. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And what do you suggest to people that are feeling this, as you call them, the soul grumbles, those little that are starting to get a little bit of shifting, or as you hearing that voice?
We'll get into therapy if you can afford it. Also, get onto
Mm-hmm.
places like Facebook or any social connection sites and find people who are doing this kind of work. Facebook has supported me a lot. There's a soul pod of wonderful people around Soulshaping on my fan page in the book group, and it's happening. There really is this wonderful, burgeoning, connective, growing movement happening, and to find that movement, not to be shy about it, because it makes a real huge difference when you're, falling into the next wave of your unresolved shadow material, and instead of just sitting alone in a room wondering if there is anything benevolent out there, to go onto Facebook and to find somebody else's status that is someone's dealing with exactly the same issues. That's a wonderful, important thing. Something I didn't have when I did the work, and I think would have really helped to elevate my journey.
Yeah, I agree. I know now because there's so much support. I think that if people can get past the idea of reaching out, and even sometimes you don't even have to say anything, you can just listen, like coming to programs like this, and there's other programs, and your book, other books, CDs, there is, but I agree though, the live support, I think that like on the Facebook or even some people with the Twitter stream, connecting with those people that and sharing their experience, I think can be so important at this stage, any stage, all the way through, actually.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's just important for us to make sure that our support is grounded support, not just a lot of spiritual aphorisms, including some of the aphorisms from my book, that just sometimes it can get a little bit too kitschy, and I think we really have to come back all the time in our supporting of others to not just positive up frames, there's a lesson in it for you, all that, but actually grounded spirituality, which includes divine perspiration, which includes understanding the importance of working the psychological material. That's where we're still at. Whatever our unresolved
we are the
issues
emotional body.
The monsters that keep coming, mine are still coming. It's not like I write the book and they're gone. And to understand that that's where the collective consciousness is, and we have to be willing, if we're going to be truly supportive, to get into the soup with each other in a real way. Because otherwise you soft touch it too much, and in fact nobody really gets anywhere.
No, and the shadow, all the material gets projected out, and we don't, go for that's. I love that you're speaking this, and that's also in your book.
Mucky.
Yeah,
we're courageous warriors, and we're still in the muck. We're in the muck. Let's just get in the muck together, and don't put a timeline on how long we're going to be in the muck for. We may have to be in the muck for 10 years together before we start to see a kind of light that's sustainable and that's really linked to our soul scriptures for this lifetime. Let's be realistic about it. Let's honor the warrior that we are to be able to go through that process, because surrender alone is not going to get us there, and stay solid about it. And I think that's what's happening more, but there's also the other thing happening, which is it's just a real simple thing. You ask the universe for what you want, you get it. And I think we have to really keep calling those models on their ungrounded nature if we're going to be of service to each other.
But I think books like yours and the words that are coming through are guiding people to this, that, this is also a piece, this is valid, because for so long it was shadowed, it was... So bringing that out so that people do have that awareness, because sometimes people just don't know, and stuff keeps coming up and they think something's wrong, and it's like, no, this is actually, everyone goes through this. You have to deal with this part of you. There's nothing wrong with you. That's just, like you had said earlier, part of the path. It's intrinsic.
Well, I think even more than that, I think it actually is the grist for the soul mill. It's where the growth happens. I mean, it's not just something you put up with. It's not just something that's part of the journey. It really is essential to the journey. This is where the collective unconscious is gripped. This is where the karmic fodder is. The soul's lessons are harvested right in the heart of that, and the key is learning how to and being encouraged in seeing that emotional material and those issues all the way through what I call the conversion tunnel to the lessons that they contain. That's the key. And stopping halfway is the most dangerous thing we do. Superficializing it, shallowing the process, because what's going to happen, you're going to get in that tunnel, and the tunnel's going to start closing in on you. You want people to encourage you, either by reaching through and pulling your arm through, or by pushing your ass through the closure in the tunnel, so you can get all the way through it. And yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of it's a bit of a harsh image.
No,
but that's it. It's a birthing tunnel.
But is it? But that's
you need
what's
the doctor
needed,
to
though.
pull you out sometimes. I mean, that's what it is. And it's going to take a lot. It made the gestation, but the whole thing's going to sometimes take a long time. My abandonment material was not going to be worked through in 3 sessions with a psychotherapist. It's simply not true. That is an ongoing part of my process. I inform it differently. It informs my path differently now, but it keeps coming up. And in fact, in my capacity to sit in those abandonment triggers for longer, for example, that's my cellular expansion, because I'm now more capable of being present and in the moment in my spirituality, because I've expanded my capacity to sit in those uncomfortable feelings. That's how you grow. That's the gift. Whoever told me that when I'm in my jab, my jealousy, abandonment, betrayal trigger at 22, having cold sweats, crazy feelings, where did this come from? I wish they had taught me in school to say, oh, by the way, that's the greatest gift God ever gave you. You're going to love this stuff, because as you work your way through it, you're going to actually expand your consciousness. Wow.
Yeah. That's the expansion. You have to go. The way out is the way through.
That's it.
And I love it you say, right, not to focus on the time, because so many times people are like, okay, this should be up, or I did this already. Why is this coming up again? Or this should be done in a month, or 1 weekend. And you're actually saying don't focus on the time.
Yeah, good luck
I know,
with
the weekend
thing that's going to empower you. And I mean, you can have peak experiences, you can have intense depth charge moments that change your life, but to integrate that is going to take a long time, for example. So it's never that simple. You're going to come back into your stuff, and it may inform your stuff differently, but at some point it's good for you to come back into it, integrate that peak experience, transform over time so that it's solid and sustainable, and not just like, I used to hang out with these people that would do, it was called the forum, like they would do like these weekend things. They were really radically different for like 11 to 15 days after those weekends. And then they were the same. And then they were the same.
Then they crashed.
And maybe they got some good aphorisms, some good ideas, some good reminders that will sustain them through the dark times. That's fantastic, but no substitute for a deep working through over time. This path is divine perspiration. It doesn't mean you don't have fun. It doesn't mean it doesn't get better. It doesn't mean that you don't have more bliss as time goes by. But my experience, and only my experience really, has been that I've gotten more authentic, more deeply present, more open to all of it as time has gone by. And that includes being able to sit in discomfort for longer periods of time than I used to, without resisting it, without seeing it as the enemy of the path. Not the enemy.
Yeah, I like that. It's not the enemy. Yeah, it's not someone or something trying to get you.
No.
One of the things I love that you touch on was the, and again, and you've quoted Shoham Trungpa, who I love his book.
Spiritual material.
Cutting through spiritual material. Yes, genius. But you touch upon, which I love, because you say you are a warrior, and of course you study Ashtanga yoga. But you said something very profound, that when you went to the mat and found that it was bringing up, I guess anger or rage, or or you were perhaps getting competitive. That a change, touch on that a change needed to happen. Again, to me, you're showing again that looking within, not in a judgmental way or a punitive way, but an awareness way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a Pitta, in Ayurvedic medicine. I'm like my whole orientation is all warrior. So when I would do too much Ashtanga, I used to say that I'm in the Pitta despair, because I was too overcharged. I was already a caffeinated being, and it was like when I drink coffee and I become crazy. And I would get out of an Ashtanga class and get in the car and start honking all the cars in front of me. So it wasn't really the right yoga. My physical form and reflected in my soul shape was already too warrior, and my movement in this life was in a more surrendered or vulnerable direction. So now what I do is I combine, usually I do like the first 30 or 40 minutes of the Ashtanga class or Vinyasa class, and then I do restorative poses for the next half of the class all on my own, and that seems to be kind of the perfect balance for my orientation. Yeah, I mean, you got to find, like everything, the right therapy, the right everything, the right form of meditation, and the right yoga for you, the one that moves you in the right direction in your soul-shaping journey. And that's a subtle awareness that, for my case, it was obvious. I mean, I was crazy after these classes, but for other people, that's why I always suggest that they try out all kinds of different types of yoga to see what works best for them.
But one thing that I'm so hearing with you is this going within, this, as you call the soul tracking, being in touch. Because a lot of people are not, and maybe on the outside you can see there needs to be a different focus or activity or to balance, to allow the healing on a soul level. How did you develop that, Jeff? Because I know in reading your book you have stories of this and you touch upon it, but for our listeners, a way that they can, does one begin to see, I guess, that direction or what's emerging, or that something perhaps isn't as life-enhancing or isn't supportive or healing? Because, we're so bombarded with that this is cool, or this teacher's cool, or do it this way, not necessarily taking into account, is this the way for me? Is this right for me?
I never have an easy recipe for how somebody gets this kind of more attuned sense of what's true to path for them. This is it. This is the work, and until you do that work, you're not living your life. You're not walking in your own shoes. The way that I did it really was through tens of thousands of moments. Moments of decision, and not easy moments. Most of the time, 51% of me would say, lay on the couch and feel into what's inside of you, this range of emotions and pathways pulling at you. And 49% of me would say, go rent a video and distract and watch a film. And, it's just trial and error. It's just like, that's it. You just try something and it feels a little truer, and then you play with this idea of truth. What does truth mean? My theory is that because it's all connected to the body, that we get truth chills. We get literally a physical, tangible experience of authenticity. Like, when you're bottling something up and you finally say something to the person that you wanted to say something to forever, and you feel so fantastic. You get waves of resonance, That was like one of my measures. I often say that the body is the authenticity monitor for the path, and my body told me if it constricted, if it defended, if it felt uncomfortable, then I knew. If I was restless and agitated, and then if I honored that voice, even something simple like lay on the couch and learn to feel what's inside of you, even though it was uncomfortable, there was a level at which I was relaxed in my own body. I was honoring my voice, and you just keep playing with it, and you keep making mistakes, and you're going to make a million of them, until you just get a little bit closer to it. And then it stops feeling like some esoteric, flaky idea of something, but you really start to understand that there is this truth inside of you that wants to be expressed and manifest. But for me, I didn't have a lot of clarity to begin with. I had a strong witness observer for whatever reason, but not a lot of clarity. It took seemingly forever to begin to know where I was supposed to.
Well, it sounds like, though, you've gotten that wonderful language. We do have callers. If you do have a question, press 1 on the keypad so that I do know that you have a question or a comment. And again, that number is 347-539-5122, and press 1 on the keypad if you have a question. Susie in the chat is asking about the confusion.
Yeah.
I want to know what the true meaning of my life is. I get so confused. That does seem to come up for quite a few people, the confusion.
I have, if Susie does a Google, Good Morning America, Jeff Brown, Befriending Confusion, they a few weeks ago posted one of my weekly inspirations called Befriending Confusion that speaks to that.
Okay.
And I covered a lot of ground pretty quickly on that page. I think that befriending confusion is the heart of this process for almost forever on the journey, many, many years. First, it's about like allowing the confusion to come to the surface, all these different pathways of possibility. hearing, like one voice that says you should be this, one voice that says you should be that, letting all those voices simmer together in the stew, in the soul stew that is you, And then after you've sat for a while and you see these different directions that you can go, and it may take a long time before you can hear them all, give them voice, everybody gets the turn with the walking stick, then you almost write them down, and then you start to try them on for size. The cellular phone rings, you answer it, and you try it on for size. Something says, well, I think that I should be a mother and I, should explore the domestic path, so you explore the path, You try it on for size. You fully embody the path. And then you get information through that experience, not through theory, as to whether, in fact, it was the direction you needed to go. And that's life, until you walk your way into something that where you have no dissonance anymore. I had so much dissonance along the way. And then I sat in the house, and even the first few years where I had dissonance about writing the book and shame came up. But now, and towards the end of writing the book, the last couple of years of it, it was just like clear as a bell that I was where I was supposed to be, It took a long time to get there and a lot of dissonance to get there. And I think I come back to that. You have to expect confusion on the path, and you have to learn how to befriend it. You have to, or you won't move forward. And not to be ashamed of it. It's not to be ashamed of it. It's the most important thing.
And that's it. And Susie is saying thank you for answering that.
I mean, remember, most people are just fronting. They pretend they know who they are.
Yeah.
Don't forget that.
I know. That's true. The behind the scenes, it's much different. In the inner state, it's much different no matter looks like on the outside. Yeah. Everyone is walking these similar steps.
Yeah, we're in it together. Yeah. Michelle, did I lose you? I think I lost her. You better hang up and try back.
Just got bumped. Jeff? Just got bumped. Jeff, are you there? Okay.
Michelle?
Yes, hi. We just got bumped. We got a lot of people
bumped.
online. Yeah, I got bumped too. But do you have that also on your website?
Befriending Confusion?
Yes, Befriending Confusion.
Oh, yeah, soulshaping.com. Yeah, there's a Befriending Confusion blog that's very similar to the other piece.
Okay.
Yeah, soulshaping.com.
And it's Befriending Confusion. Okay, because we had another...
Confusion, yeah. It's also a chapter in the book.
Okay, confusion. Okay, because we had another question come in about that. And those of you that are listening, we are on air with Jeff Brown, author of Soulshaping, and you can find out more information on soulshaping.com. And let's see, honeybees my user on Facebook. Okay, and you're also on Facebook. We have another question. You mentioned Facebook. Yeah. How can they connect with you on Facebook?
They can try to connect on the personal page, although Facebook doesn't always let me take the friend requests. There's also a Jeff Brown fan page, and there's an Open Heart Gang fan page. And then there's two groups, a Soulshaping book group, and there's an International Year of the Woman book group as well.
Okay, the Soulshaping book group.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Oh, Jeff, this has been wonderful.
Great.
Thank you so much for coming on Awakenings and sharing. It was wonderful insight and information from you. Great. All right. And our guest has been Jeff Brown. If you'd like more information on Soulshaping and other work that Jeff is doing, you can reach him at soulshaping.com. And again, listener participants, thank you so much for being a part of this segment of Awakenings. If you'd like to send in any questions or comments, you can at awakeningsradio@selfandlight.com, and let us know how and where you listen to Awakenings, and also, of course, the Awakenings Radio fan page on Facebook as well. So until next time, continue to share your insights, shine your light, and keep awake. And we're going to leave with a little bit of Happiness by DJ Haiti. Create a great day.